I was doing shots and knocking down doors. He came into my house and he attacked me with a shotgun and a rope. And he hiked over a mile through the woods in that tree line behind my house, so no one would see his vehicle. We're not told alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen. We're not told that alcohol causes dementia. We are not taught that it is not glamorous. It is sloppy and nasty. And it's a complete show of your own inability to control your emotions. Alcohol is just a tool to compartmentalize whatever it is that's going on in your life you don't want to deal with. It wasn't a bottle and a half of wine. It was whatever I could get my hands on to go back to sleep. I couldn't be awake. My mind was broken. I was broken. I was physically and mentally broken.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today's guest is Shana, a woman who survived things most people can't even imagine. Born into trauma, raised by an addicted, abusive mother, and trapped in a decade-long relationship that ended in tragedy right in front of her eyes. That pain pulled her into drinking a bottle and a half of wine every day until shame and isolation nearly destroyed her. What was the emotional environment that you came into?
Well, I was born to a teenage mother. She was very young. She was 15. So she was not equipped whatsoever with parenting skills. And my environment was that of her, unequipped. And she also married young and had the challenge of having 2 more children by the age of 18. So the environment that I grew up in was it was actually a very strict environment, very structured, and she did not have the ability to process her own emotions. And so she had zero ability to help us as children with our own. I was the oldest, and a lot of responsibility fell on my shoulders being the oldest. And because she also suffered with migraine headaches. I mean, they were debilitating throughout my entire childhood. I was a caregiver to her as well. So my existence was basically taking up all the slack in the home where the adults could not. So that was raising my sisters, taking care of my mother. There was never a constant male figure in the house. That was always a revolving door. I also grew up without a father. That was never an option, nor was it something that was wanted or needed for me as a child. So I did not have that male role model or the protector image in the house, or a clear view of what a male role model looks like or what a normal relationship might be. Now, we did not have alcohol in our house whatsoever. We grew up, or I say we because my mother grew up with me. She was 15 when I was born. We grew up together. Alcohol wasn't allowed. It wasn't even an issue because her father was an alcoholic, and it was a big no-no to drink. And in my culture, we are Cajuns from Louisiana. It's a big part of our culture to be able to play music and enjoy alcohol when you're doing that. But what it really did was help systematically break down our family dynamic that we had in our culture. And it's strengthening and it's growing right now. It makes me emotional. For a long time, the Acadian community was just an oppress, and still that way in a lot of areas. But I digress. So in my home, because of my grandfather's alcoholism, my mother came from a broken home, and my grandmother became a single mother. Well, that being said, there wasn't a lot of oversight on my mother. It's my conception. Navigating childhood was very hard because I wasn't allowed the childhood part of my life because of my responsibilities. I was allowed free thought. She encouraged me, she encouraged intellect, and she encouraged me to study and to read. And she taught me so many things. Before kindergarten, I knew how to read, write, tell time. She was very good at teaching, but there were regiments to that you had to adhere by, and strict rules. So I learned very early to disassociate, and my way to disassociate from the chaos around me was to read. I mean, my nose was always in a book. When I was a little girl, I read Encyclopedia Britannica for fun. And I started that as soon as I could read. We had the whole set in our living room. I mean, from 5 years old forwards. I was just always learning history and studying because if I did that, I knew I'd stay out of trouble with her and I wouldn't set her off and I wouldn't disrupt her headache or whatever was the issue of the day. So my disassociation did start very early, but it was with I'm doing something positive and you can't be mad at
Mm.
me. So that carried on into my teenage years. As I started rebellion at 15 years old, I actually did join a friend group who drank, and I drank for my first time really then, and my body did not know what to do because I'm a child of trauma. My brain is not wired like a normal person without that. I completely can bypass my nervous system and go straight into fight and fright and whatever will trigger me.
You were conceived in a very traumatic way, right?
Yes. Yes. I was my mother was raped by her brother's friend. Her brother was a part of that because he didn't let her leave and he didn't protect her. So there's something that didn't develop in my mother from that trauma. And that was
Mhm.
not, I mean, that was my conception trauma, but throughout her life, it was repeated over and over
Right.
again. My mother's beautiful. And when I say that, she's stunning. And my grandmother was stunning. And men prey on that. And she was very vulnerable. So that, is a domino in a
Yeah.
generational trauma cycle that she didn't understand. Of course, I didn't understand. I'm just brought into this world. Here I am. And so not only having to us navigate through this world with all the propaganda and all the programming, we have to also come into this world with preset trauma that has
Right.
already been wired into our DNA. And that's also ancestral. Again, I'm a Cajun. Our people, there's a big story to that. And I think we still carry it with us. And we've carried that throughout every generation. And here we are. And I think that many people all over the world are feeling the call to become something better and to break cycles. And so that's what I've been working on for literally 48 years. Yes, since I could understand the world, I've been working on breaking out of some disastrous cycle that very early on I knew was not right. And this was not the right way to live or act. And I didn't understand the lack of emotional control or, self-control. And this was not alcohol. This was my programming to get me vulnerable enough to where alcohol became my tool. So, and I think that's how it grew. Of course, I made
So when you were 15,
first alcohol experience, but it didn't. I knew from the beginning it didn't affect me the same way. Everybody else is just sipping, having a great time. I was doing shots and knocking down doors. Ha funny 15-year-old Shana breaking stuff, but my body has I do not have the ability to metabolize alcohol. I finally found that out after being so sick from damaging myself systematically for years. But, finally I ran all the tests. Well, who knew? I can't metabolize it. Well, doesn't that make sense? But we're not told that. We're not told alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen. We're not told that alcohol causes dementia. We are not taught that it is not glamorous. It is sloppy and nasty. And it's a complete show of your own inability to control your emotions, yourself, because alcohol is just a tool to compartmentalize whatever it is that's going on in your life you don't want to deal with. It was a big tool for me, but I see even people around me continuously using that and thinking that that's okay because they can metabolize the alcohol better than I could. But at the end of the day, I know what's going on under the surface.
yeah.
I see the pain now. I can pick people out And it's not just
Mm-hmm.
the alcohol abuse, it's the pain. Because
Yeah.
we don't pick up a bottle because we're like enjoying life maybe the first time or the second time. But when you're doing it every day, you are masking and pain in the only way you know how, because we aren't really given a guidebook of how to
No.
deal with all these fun events that all these roadblocks and events that shape us and force us into choices. And you can stay in a cycle of making the same choice. Alcohol
Mm-hmm.
helped me do that a lot. Or you can grow and learn and move forward and then teach and help heal. And that's my goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so when you first drank, did you feel confidence or relief or
I feel
peace?
nothing. I black out because of the trauma. And I don't have to drink much. A bottle of wine will get me, half a bottle, I'm out. Shana's gone because of my ability to disassociate. Now, I've worked on that as we've talked. There was a climax to my use and abuse, and then there was the rehealing process. And my healing process has been complete marathon and not a sprint. And I think I might be stubborn and not learn lessons well, but I've had them repeat. And now I think I have a grasp on figuring it out.
Yeah.
But one thing that keeps you from that is like the judgment and shame. And that has
Yeah.
been a hard part of it for me, because I married someone
Yeah.
that was sort of in the public eye. And that is a whole different story. That's what brought me
Yeah.
to the abuse. Yeah.
So when you were a teenager, I think you kind of told me about you had a friend and then you ended up moving in with your grandma and
Yes.
like, how
So
did
my
that change
friend
your
was a
life?
very bad influence. And I was straight A student and my grades plunged, nosedive. I stopped going to school. It's like, this is the first time I feel responsibility free, stress free, all that giant weight of my childhood that was a constant weight. But gone. I was free. And I love that about my friend, who clearly didn't have the same trauma as me. She was dealing with life normally. But I love that she was so carefree and she just didn't have that burden, that feeling of such a weighted responsibility. And that's what was like the most beautiful part of it. But it didn't become a problem for me. I recognized I was headed down the wrong path. And I was like, my mother and I can't get along anymore. I'm going to leave this friend, my mom, and I'm going to live with my grandmothers. And that is where the first time I cleaned up my life, that was the first time. I've literally done it so many times, but that was first lesson. Lesson number one. So
So and then you got married.
yes, after my first marriage failed, let me just preface by saying I love him, the father of my children. Amazing person. He is one of my biggest cheerleaders, best friends. He is an awesome human. He is remarried, has a wonderful family, and I am so grateful for him. Especially when I couldn't be a mother, he picked up and helped, and he was a great dad. But so our marriage didn't last very long. He was in the military. He was gone from home quite a bit after 9/11, and we grew apart, and I was in the real world and he was there, and it was just different times back then. And so we divorced. When we divorced, someone that I had a crush on since early age, because he was my best friend's brother, was also getting a divorce. And so we sort of gravitated easily together because we lived in the same small community. Our families were friends. I was clearly best friends with his sister, and our children played together. It was like easy and safe. And that's what I was always looking for, is something easy and safe. But without knowing, I was gravitating to the same exact thing that I was trying to always escape. And that was
Trauma bond.
control. The hardest part was that I married a man that everyone loved. He was the most charming, bigger than life guy. That he was clever and witty and funny and quippy, and he always was making everyone laugh, happy, controlled the crowd. Wherever we went, he was the guy. But I was not allowed to be me. I was the ornament, and I had I better not talk much. It's basically how the 10-year relationship went. And there are so many examples and instances, but he was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and he could flip a switch so easily. And the whole world saw this great guy, and he had that inside of him. But he also was an alcoholic, and he was bipolar. And I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but that combination was so terrible. It was just a daily minefield. That I was walking through minefields from the moment I woke up every day until I blacked out and went to bed every night. And that's when the wine gradually seeped in, because wine is acceptable. It is glamorous. It's fancy. Even my grandmother let me have wine because it's good for you. So in my mind, I was, drinking half a bottle with my friends after we picked up the kids from school, and cooking dinner and waiting for him to come home and making sure that I drank enough. So when he came home, whatever was about to happen, I somehow could deal with it. It gave me the inability to deal with it, but it was very volatile. So he would complain. Now, let me just tell you about his alcoholism. So he had a bottle of vodka everywhere. There was in my kids' closets, in the drawers, in his vehicle, in the console, in his desk drawers, in his closet, everywhere he could stuff, in the bathroom, towels, everywhere he could put like a vodka and I guess hide it. I don't know how much he was actually drinking, because I just know he was kind of always drinking. But he was so good at hiding it from everyone because he was always boisterous and always just this big personality. And they just thought, oh, he's just funny and, great. But what was really going on is he was constantly drunk, and he was a salesman. And so it was a big part of just him always staying upbeat and that guy. But he was abusive when he got drunk. And he was so great at hiding it from everyone, even the kids, our kids. They got a taste of it, and it did escalate. And I'll tell more of that as we go along. But he was really good at hiding it. And at the beginning of the relationship, it was just fun and casual. It was social. We're at events. We're doing this. But then it became a control mechanism for me. If he couldn't control what came out of my mouth when I was drinking, that's when the problem started. And when I was drinking, if he were saying the mean things or bringing up some painful past things to get me in, he would really try to work me into this frenzy.
Yeah, poke the bear.
Yeah, he was constantly doing that. So I didn't want to give him that power. So throughout this relationship, as I was learning to heal on my own, doing all these things to fix the problem, I was always told it was my fault, my fault, my fault, my fault. And I was just kept in that shame cycle that I couldn't see. I did see it, and that's when I crawled out of it. But it was hard. It was hard, especially when my community was my best friend, the sister. And, I gravitated to the mother because of my inability to have that sort of relationship with my own mother. And I looked up to the father because the rest of the family looked up to the father. And after everything came to a halt, a tragic end, those people abandoned me, and I had the ability to step outside the situation and realize he's this way for a reason. He learned.
Do you mind telling the community how it ended tragic?
Yes, I don't mind at all. So this was a 10-year relationship, but at some point I was able to find a career path, become financially stable independently, and start putting boundaries in this relationship. And I started reading a lot of self-help books. One of them, the very first, it just stands out so strongly because it was called Boundaries in Marriage. And I did write down the author's name. We could probably put that in the link later if it's important to everyone. But when I started implementing these very small boundaries, and they were boundaries with my best friend, his sister, boundaries with him, they didn't like the boundaries. They didn't like that I said, I can't do A, B, C, and D. When I started having a free thought and a mind of my own is when just things went really haywire. When he no longer could control me through the alcohol and could no longer control me with the perception he had made, when narcissism is a very tricky mental illness. And to be in close proximity to a narcissist for a very extended amount of time and to be that narcissist source of energy, emotional energy, it's very difficult for people to understand what that really looks like in one's home and what kind of mental prison that puts the abused in and how it entraps you. And free thought is not a part of that entrapment. And so when I started being an individual again, now let me tell you, there was not only the physical abuse or the mental and verbal abuse. He cheated constantly. He cheated throughout our entire marriage. There was never a time he didn't cheat. Somewhere in my weird trauma brain, I was like, okay with the hitting because I came from that. And I was like, okay, it's anger. He hit me. I don't know. I convinced myself that was okay. But the cheating is what finally did me in. I couldn't handle the constant cheating because there was a cycle of that too, where he would cause these arguments, say that it was my fault. He had to leave. And then he would be gone for weeks with a woman in the Caribbean. And it was just systematic. But again, I broke free. I broke free of it. But breaking free isn't really breaking free of a narcissist. And if you've been in that situation, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. It started out with me trying to file for a divorce. The divorce took over a year and a half. He refused to sign. During that period, I had blocked my phone number, distanced myself, went gray rock, as they say, did all the things I had to do. Sister, that was my best friend, gave him my new phone number. His family could not handle him when I wasn't the babysitter for him. And so they drug me back into it because he was threatening and he was doing all these things. And this was back in 2009. And I was just trying to focus on my career and my kids and move on. But that did not happen. The hooks came, I was clawed back in, or I tried to claw out, kicking and screaming, but I was drawn back in by everyone. And I loved them, and they knew that. So I did. I got him help. I got him a doctor. He got diagnosed with his bipolar disorder. They put him on medication. We went back to church, did all the things, but the abuse and the cheating continued. He refused to take his medication. It was just, and of course he drank. He drank with the medication. This was, the caveat. He hid, he drank, he did the things. He moved out. Finally, 2012. I lived in my home. He lived in his home, an hour and a half away. He had a relationship. I did not. I was stalked constantly. I was not allowed to have a relationship. It was constant. I never knew when he was going to fly straight through my front door or when he was, he was just, just didn't know what he was going to ever do. And he threatened me constantly. I mean, it was constant threats. But by 2014, I was in just such a mental state of trying to keep it all together. My business, my children, my mental health, just trying. And I was going nowhere with it. And I was still every day coming home, drinking the wine with my neighbors, watching the kids play, blacking out, doing it again the next day, getting through. I was just autopilot. And I would go through these periods of sobriety because I knew this is what you have to do if you want to get yourself out of all this, if you want to break away, and it's still in my mind. I never thought that all this stalking and restraining orders and all the things that he was going to try to murder me. I didn't have that thought because I was dumb and I was drunk and didn't have my full capabilities of discernment. One morning, in 2014, the sun was rising and my dog started barking, and that's not a big deal. We lived against a wooded tree line and there were always animals. So I'm going to let my dogs out. Now, I probably should tell you that a week before this incident, he had come to my house and broken some things and like threw a fit and threw some things. And I called the police, and the police came, and the police were very aware of all the situations because a year before he had physically pushed me and then prevented my daughter from calling 911. And so he got in more trouble for preventing a 911 call. By the way, this is the third county in Texas that the abuse had happened and that the police knew. Now, the abuse happened more often, but the police knew 3 times. 3 police reports were filed. Nothing was ever done about it. But the third time when he prevented the 911 call, it became a big deal. And that was when I guess it really took a turn with him because he was finally in trouble. And
Oh.
because of the domestic abuse, they took away his gun, which was a big deal to a Texas guy. And he didn't like that. And they forced him into anger management courses, and he did not like that. And he was really losing a grip on his own, I guess, reality and ability to control his own environment. And that it leached onto me because I was the savior. I was always the one like helped him pick up the pieces and cleaned up the mess and told all the glorified the story so it wouldn't look so bad, took some blame, laughed it off, and moved on to the next family holiday. But the night before all this took place, he again was threatening me. Now, granted, mind you, he is with his girlfriend in a whole another town 3 hours away. But he was losing his mind because I was honest with him and told him that I had decided to date after 4 years of divorce, okay? After many of his relationships. It's just ludicrousy. Anyway, he lost his mind, and he's with his girlfriend calling from her phone. I blocked his numbers. He's doing all these just crazy things. And I got on the phone with his family, and I'm like, he's doing these things. I am not his Band-Aid. I cannot help him. You guys have to do this. And I talked to his sister, his ex-wife, his college-age daughter who lived near him. I begged everyone to take care of their family member. And they gave him some kind words and patted him on the head and sent him on his way. And so that next morning, after the hundreds of phone calls, I was on the phone with the police as well because I didn't know his new address. And he was threatening suicide again. And no one would send the police to his address. The people who knew his address refused to help him, refused to send a police to his door to make sure that he was all right. Everyone in his that knew what was happening, they just refused. They said, pray about it and move on. And that was probably the biggest problem in his life, that he had never learned accountability because his family were always cleaning up his messes. And so that morning at sunrise, when I heard my animals barking, I just thought in my half sleep it was an animal in the wooded area. But as soon as I opened my door, he rushed in on me and he came into my house and he attacked me. He had driven from Fort Worth, Texas, 3 hours to our small community with a shotgun and a rope. And he hiked over a mile through the woods in that tree line behind my house, so no one would see his vehicle because the cops were aware of what was going on. And everyone in my neighborhood was aware of what was happening. So he hid in my backyard until the dogs were alerted by his movement. And I opened the door, and that's when just all hell came into my home. And when I say hell came into my home, I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because his eyes were black. They were completely dark and black, and he did not hear me. He did not see me. He did not hear me. And the only thing that saved my life that day was he was not aware that I had a house guest. And when that house guest rushed him and tried to hold him because he had already attacked me. I was face down on the ground. He was already on my back, head down, had me. And he didn't know someone was in my home. And that person saved my life. Saved my life because he attacked him. The gun flew out of his hand across the floor, and it was enough time that he took free of the person trying to hold him. that he was able to run, get the gun. The person, God's such a poet, in our stories. And the person who was there grabbed my large wooden wine rack and hurled it in front to protect from the bullet. And as that happened, the wine bottle busted across the entire dining room floor. So there was red wine everywhere, broken glass bottles, and a gun pointed straight into my face. And he turned the gun on the person who was protecting themselves with the wooden rack and fired a shot. While he was firing the shot, I was able to deflect it when I hit his hand, and it shot above that person's head this much. And when he realized, I don't know, there was some clarity in a moment. There was a moment of clarity. And it was almost like he realized what he had done. He took the gun from pointing into my face and he turned it on himself and he pulled the trigger and he collapsed on the floor 4 feet in front of me. To tell you the amount of shock and horror. No movie prepares you for that sort of scene, like what the impact of a gun will do or how. It was just terrible. So I was injured. The person was injured. We went and got stitched up. My ex-husband passed away at the hospital from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And that, I just thought I had trauma before, but that's really where the story started because I lost my mind. My mind slipped away. It was gone. And not only my mind, my community, my best friend, my perceived mother, my perceived father, my brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews that I had spent 20 plus years with were all gone with that one shot. They disappeared.
And the pastor of the church, because it was his best friend.
The pastor of our church, the only time that we missioned with the church, we taught Bible study with the church. My husband played golf with the pastor. I sang at the church. We were heavily involved. I had received one phone call and one Facebook DM from him. And the phone call was the next day to ask about who he could contact for the funeral arrangement. And the next contact was about 2 years later, was to ask me on my relationship status. So yeah, it was devastating. I've always been able to, or I've always had to figure things out on my own. So I'm grateful for not having those people around during my time to heal because I wouldn't have been able to. I think I would be stuck in victimhood if I would have stayed with the people who perpetuate victimhood and victim shaming and glorify the person that really needed the most help and attention because he just made everyone laugh and it was cute.
Yeah.
When I had the black eyes and the broken rib and the busted nose and, it's just, wow, you guys condone that. Where did he learn it? Well, I know where he learned it because his father was abusive to his mother and his mother was an alcoholic and his sister cheated on her husband constantly. And they were just a group of liars and deceivers. Without me being able to step away from that influence, I would never have been able to grow and to heal. And I felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean and I just had no air left. And I chose for a solid year and a half. It wasn't a bottle and a half of wine. It was whatever I could get my hands on to go back to sleep. Yeah. I couldn't be awake. I went to counseling. I went to therapy. I went to the doctor and got on every sort of new anxiety, new antidepressant, everything I could possibly get my hands on. My mind was broken. I was broken. I was physically and mentally broken. And I had to put those pieces back together. And I don't think I would feel as strong today if I relied on everyone else to do the work for me.
I would play the victim.
Yeah, I would just be restuck in the cycle. And I have been able to break out of that system and that oppression. He couldn't oppress me. They can't oppress me. The programming can't oppress me. I'm going to grow. And when I learn and when I grow, I'm going to teach, because there's so many of us that keep it a secret and let everybody glorify and keep quiet because they have been told that it's their fault and you should be ashamed. And maybe if you didn't talk, then you wouldn't cause him to be mad. And you know what? You guys are just oil and vinegar. Oil and vinegar. I just love that. Oil and vinegar. You mean like good and evil? I'm confused. Please help me with this explanation, because
Right.
that does not justify the behavior. So after a year and a half of being just given medication that didn't work and talk therapy that just re-traumatized me over and over again, and the inability to connect because I had zero trust for authority. So you're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, so what? I mean, tell me how I can heal. I don't want to tell you my story over and over. You give me some tools and then I will do that. I will do 1, 2, 3, A, B, and C, but I don't want to just talk to you over and over again. And that's what I kept running up to. And it just re-traumatized me until the 2 weeks later, when I had to deal with the 2 weeks window until I could go back and not drink and keep the racing thoughts away. And the mind, I had zero ability to do that. My nervous system was fried. It was fried. So after beating my head against the wall over and over with the typical modalities of healing, I said, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. So I fortunately moved to a state that marijuana became legal. And I said, okay, well, I have anxiety. I'm going to do this. And guess what? I put down the alcohol as my little crutch and I picked up this. And I know it's encouraged to cold turkey things and to have that willpower and to be all the wonderful things that we are told to be. But I am not that. And I do things on my own and I figure it out in my own way. And what I figured out was I can't stop my nervous system. I don't have the ability to control what now has been rewired in my brain. I'm not like you and you and you that can have your couple of glasses and just be fine and go home. I am a different beast. And
Same.
yeah, it affects me differently. Everything. The cookie cutter remedies are not for me. It appears with the low success rate in some of these cookie cutter remedies that it's not really for everyone either. So I am a researcher by profession, and I just dove in head deep. What is working for others? What is going, where can I find something that is taking this thing away? And I found a European method. It's called the Sinclair Method. And it was as simple as low dosing with a pharmaceutical medication that is so cheap and it doesn't have a patent that it is not uh, commercialized or encouraged because you can't profit. But Europeans were doing it and it had an 88% success rate. And I was like, done, let's try it out. I had this doctor who was willing to prescribe it for me, even though it's not meant for that. And guess what? It worked. It cut off my pleasure center and it gave me the ability to stop and to not receive that same euphoric feeling and the ability to escape as I had grown accustomed to. So that step 1. Step 2 was the marijuana, and it just kind of all became like putting the chemicals down and trying to be more natural with my approach. But because it seemed like the natural remedies were making such a big impact in my daily function and my ability to perform because it's all mental for my profession, it was enabling me to control my fight, flight, or fright or triggered symptoms. And once I broke away from pharmaceuticals and started natural treatment is where my healing process really took off. I would go and I have put down the alcohol. My journey is like it's just an up and down. Because I've had to learn along the way that my alcohol abuse is directly correlated to now because I'm no longer chemically dependent on alcohol. My alcohol abuse became correlated to when I would have a triggering event. And I would find myself, months would go by. Great. Shana's great. Nothing's going on. And it really happened in 24. And I'll just kind of briefly go over this, but I went and saw a movie. And these are the triggers that it's so hard to understand, these just things that seem so minuscule. But to a person like me, it's a mountain. So you're just having your normal day and you go see a movie and then all of a sudden you remember something that happened to you.
Yeah.
And you remember someone put something in your beer once and the way you woke up the next day. And you remember, and then you realize what had happened to you. And guess what? That
Yeah.
wouldn't have happened. Well, it might have happened even if I was drinking a bottle of water because he is a predator. But, if I would have been in my full capacity, would it? Wouldn't I have been able to discern what was going on? Maybe. I don't
It's
know.
always the question. It's always a question. But it
Right.
doesn't matter. Predators should be blamed, not the victim. But the victims are always shamed and blamed.
Absolutely. And I had learned that from repeatedly always being told in childhood that my mood depends on your actions. And then in my married adult life, my mood depends solely on your actions. And, it just evolves into you always believing if I was better and I can control my actions and you'll be great. Nonsense. So in 24, I realized.
So I'm sorry.
sorry.
Sorry, I didn't want to. So you stopped drinking in what year and switched
It's
to
on and
marijuana?
off, on and off. When it became legal in Oklahoma, I believe like 2020, 2019. And so alcohol is just put away, receiving the dust in the cabinet, if you will, because even though I had been chemically dependent on it through that time period where I was a lunatic, I had already broke away from that, and so it was collecting dust, but I knew it was there. And
Right.
so I could go these long periods, but if I had a breakdown or even if I was just emotional and, wanted an excuse, then boom,
Mhm.
it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months, but it happened. And then I was in a binge for 3, 4, 5 days. Gone. She's gone again, And it was the same.
Yeah.
I'm not a big social drinker. I don't like it because I'm judged when I drink. So I learned to be a closet drinker. Literally used to have closet wine. When my girlfriends would come over, we would go look at shoes in the closet and drink wine, closet wine. It was just wild that was okay. But so I had starts and stops with alcohol. I kept trying to integrate it back into my life like a normal person, eat casually, because my husband can do that, and some people can do that. But for me, it chemically alters my brain and then sets me back into those lower frequencies that I've escaped from. And so it's really just been a start and a stop and a start and a stop and allowing the trigger to take over into using the excuse like, oh, I'll just slip away with the alcohol again. And then finally coming to the realization after being triggered by that movie, Blink Twice, horror movie, I'll never watch it again. But by being triggered by that movie, I realized in that I can't control it. And I have to figure out how to control my triggers so I don't slip into the alcohol. And that is when I finally met a psychiatrist who is an integrative psychiatrist. So he's an anesthesiologist, a psychiatrist, but he also did a year in India. He also is a spiritual and he uses different modalities and he really understands the process of the brain and trauma and the effects of trauma on the brain and what can rewire that to fix that disconnect that I bypass that moves straight past my prefrontal lobe and directly somewhere else. He was able to tell me what would fix that and then give it to me. And so I went through a series of ketamine treatment facilitated by him in his office. And there's a whole protocol. And if you do this sequence of treatment, it rewires that. And after the first treatment, I could tell such a difference. It was amazing. The hamster did not jump back on the wheel. It stopped. It got off and it read a book and then decided what to do. There was no more racing in here. And there was no more trauma loop. And I had the ability at that point to stop it. And I didn't realize I didn't have that ability before. I kept beating myself up over and over, like, you can be stronger. You can be better. You can do more. It is your fault. And yeah, I have responsibility in that, but I also have responsibility on fixing the broken thing and figuring out how to fix it. And I did. And so Dr. Simonson of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, has saved my life. He has completely fixed the broken wheel inside of my brain and has given me the ability to, I don't have triggers. I was just telling you before we started recording. It's funny how God tests us, and I am so happy that I am a part of his test, because he sent me on a business trip to the same town that the trauma happened. And my daughter and I rode by our old house, and there was nothing. There was no pain and terror and torture and loss. And it was gone. It was gone. And it was so therapeutic to go back and to revisit. And no, hey, what? You beat that. It didn't affect you. It didn't drag you under. You have control. You didn't want a glass of wine. And you could have, because you hung out with your girlfriends last night and they really wanted to drink, but you told your story and they didn't. And I feel like I win. I win. Every time I make those little decisions, I win. I'm the winner of the game.
Yeah.
I get to grow.
I just want to throw this out there that you did ketamine therapy under a doctor's supervision.
Dr. Simon.
I just want to throw that out there.
And I wouldn't, I'm not a street drug user, nor would I ever be. But because he could scientifically explain to my analytical, untrusting mind, broken mind, the way that this chemical would rewire things to help me control this broken nervous system. I trusted him because of his credentials as an anesthesiologist and a licensed psychiatrist. I put my trust in him, and it did. It worked. It fixed the broken wiring for me. And again, there's not every alcohol abuser looks the same. Not all trauma looks the same. We each have this individual story and this individual path on our journey made of choices along each and every step. And if we make those right choices and choose to be vulnerable and choose to trust and choose to maybe step outside the normal box of healing and to do other modalities, which also leads me into now I have started becoming involved in healing retreats, and I will be a part of a retreat coming up shortly in December with my psychiatrist and a colleague and a group of people that will be utilizing plant medicine and heat and cold plunge therapies and nature therapy on a weekend retreat. And my husband and myself are talking with investors and putting plans together for a retreat outside of Oklahoma City right now. So that is in the beginning stages, and I can't wait to use all my former shame for an example to others that may hear one or two of my words and be guided to start that journey in healing, because it's possible. I mean, I know I've heard you say you've got such a story, and there's so much more to this summation that I've given today. And there's just so many more pieces involved in all of it. And I know maybe I haven't articulated all of it in a way, but I do have an example. I was speaking with the girl who does my facials, and I've known her like 4 years. But I don't talk about my past. It's one thing I decided to hide with my head down in the shame while I was healing, because I did blame myself for not for what he did, but for me allowing myself to be in that life.
Right.
Beat myself up a lot repeatedly because I knew I was smarter than that, and I knew I had more potential than that. But I forgot where I was going. I totally lost. But my girl, so I was, since I've been to Oklahoma, that's not a thing I share. But one day, 4 years ago, I was sitting with her and she was talking and she was telling me some instances that were going on in her personal life with her husband. And she said one thing to me that just snapped me awake. And she said, well, we were in this argument and his eyes turned black. He didn't hear me. And I said, you have to get out. And I had sort of forgotten about that conversation until last week. I was sitting getting another facial. And I was talking to her about being on your podcast. And she was like, well, that's why I left. And I was like, what? Because I forgot. She told me that. And she was like, yeah, you told me your story and you told me that his eyes turned black. And when I heard that, I knew I had to get out. And she left. That, I cried. Like, I was like, oh my God, thank you, Jesus, for giving me this tale to tell that I
Yeah.
can tell someone else and open their eyes and give them my methods. Everyone has to find their own way, but we are all here to help each other along this journey. And especially in this time, we need our whole and true selves to navigate in this world. So we can't be drunk. We have to
Right.
be.
Something that you mentioned that also really helped you is like being loved is what heals. The unconditional love saved
Yes,
you.
I'm so glad you remembered that. So, long journey. Somehow through all this, ended up marrying this wonderful human. And throughout my life had been hypercritical. So my controllers made sure that I stayed within my little boundaries and didn't get out of hand. But when I married my husband, and by the way, before I met him, I lived alone and single for quite a while because I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I had made some really horrible decisions after the tragedy happened, and I didn't want to involve more people into my
Yeah.
world until I could figure out what was going on. So I met him, and someone in my family was having a discussion to someone else in my family and was talking about tough love. And if someone has an addiction, how important it is to completely cut them off and to have tough love for that person. And immediately I said, no, that's not true. Because when I finally met someone who loved me for me unconditionally, without judgment, I was finally able to breathe and to heal. I can't imagine telling someone who is in this place in life, I'm not going to love you until you act right, knowing the whole time that the reason they are so shattered is from the lack of love. When does that make sense?
We could all listen to that on repeat. Well, Shanna, thank you so much for being here today with me.